Started, okay.
All right, you bet.
Well, hi, and thank you once again for joining me at Pastor's Positive Mental Health Institute. I have yet a wonderful guest with us again, and I'll get to him in a moment, but you have to hear the spiel. If there's anything that you find beneficial about this or you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll have the contact information in the comments. Also, you can look at ppmhi.org for other information. And if you like this, again, please share it and subscribe so you don't miss any fascinating, wonderful content. So, without further delay, let's get into who we have with us today. This is Kevin Bueltmann from Shepherd's Canyon Retreat. Now, Kevin, before we get
Yeah,
into what you do at Shepherd's Canyon, I'd
sure.
love to hear kind of your journey and your call to ministry because I know that you were a
Oh, yeah.
pastor. Or
Right.
technically, you still are a pastor. I mean, as far as you still have the reverend title. So,
Right.
are you still a rostered pastor with the LCMS then?
I am. I am. And actually, I did. I actually, yeah, I've been on. Well, I'll just start at the beginning here, just real briefly here. That started in Montana, and did my DCE internship there at the church in Montana, and then we were there for about 4 years, and my wife and I moved to Illinois. I was a DCE there. And then we went to, I've always wanted to be in camp ministry. My dad was in camp ministry, camp director. And so by the time I was 30, we ended up in Nebraska, Camp Luther, Nebraska, and was there for about 7 or 8 years. And then God led us to another camp in central Illinois, Camp Silka. And we were there for about, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years, something like that. And then God said, "Hey, I want you to go to seminary and see what that's all about." So I'm like, "All right, sounds good. We'll go to seminary for a couple of years," and then came back out and was ordained and served at a parish in Central Illinois, uh, Sand Prairie Lutheran, out of Green Valley, and just loved it. It was we were there for 8 years, and so just thought that was my last job. I'd never leave, because it was a great church and loved it. And then because of my wife's health issues and some other reasons here, we ended up. They said that we had to move into a more dry climate to avoid things like mold and some other things here and stuff. And then a month after that, we got the call to serve back at my original church in Montana.
Mm.
Uh, doesn't always happen that often where you go back to a church you started like 30 years ago. I guess they forgot all the bad stuff, I guess. Anyway, so but the call was to serve as camp director and as one of the pastors. And so it's like I love camp. I love being a pastor. And and then my wife, it was good for my wife. So we moved out there, built a house because the housing market was crazy and couldn't just go out and buy one for a decent price. So it was just we built it just for her health. And after 3 years, the senior pastor took a call, and the timing of this was like about a couple of days or weeks before COVID hit.
Oh, wow.
And so the elders asked me to take on a vacancy, and I should have said no, but foolishly I said yes. I asked for help. They said, no, no, we'll have somebody here in 6 months. Well, it takes a lot longer when you're at a large church with a large school, large camp, large childcare. And so after a year, I was just completely burned out. I was angry at everybody. I was angry at God, like, why, Lord, have you forsaken me, kind of a thing. And I just lost interest in ministry. I was just burnt out. And then my wife said, "Well, hey, there's this place in Arizona called Shepherd's Canyon Retreat, and why don't we just go down there for a week and check it out?" I'm like, Arizona in the middle of February? Sure, I just away from here for a week,
Yeah.
and didn't realize, but it really is like a counseling retreat, and you spend 20 hours in counseling and stuff. And so that was the beginning of my healing process. And so, long story short, a year and a half ago, they asked us to move down there and become site directors. And then 5 months ago, Dave and Barb Anderson turned over the ministry to my wife and I. And so I'm the executive director now, and she is the executive coordinator. So,
Well, how nice you get to work together.
yes, we love it because we get to travel around the whole country. and we've put on 20,000 miles on our car since we started 5 months ago, and it's been nonstop ever since. So yeah.
Wow. Well, that's great. We'll get into Shepherd's Canyon in a minute, but you shared some things that I would just like to highlight if you're willing to, of course.
Yes.
One of the things that we look at with burnout, it begins with emotional exhaustion. And so one of the things that you kind of shared was the different hats that you were wearing, right? You had so
Oh
many
yeah.
different things, a large church, school, camp, and then throw COVID in on top of it. That's a whole different
Right.
thing. Emotionally you can't carry that load, and I know that the challenge we have as pastors is we lend ourselves to try to fix everything. We want to be the rock and the solid person in every situation, but we find ourselves stretched extremely thin, and we just
Yep.
can't carry the weight of the world. And then we find ourselves, so really kind of what you hit on was, I didn't even like the ministry anymore to some degree. And that's that depersonalization, right? Here you just said, I love camp. Before that, I love camp. I love being a pastor. What could go wrong? And then you look at yourself and go, I don't even like this anymore. And so you don't even really, you're not yourself anymore.
Right.
When you looked at Shepherd's Canyon to go down there,
Yeah.
obviously, I'm assuming you knew it was some sort of retreat center, but you kind of mentioned counseling a little bit in there.
Right.
Was that unexpected to you when you went down there?
In the state I was in, I didn't care if it was a free retreat in Hawaii just for relaxing all week or counseling. At least if it was counseling, I figured, well, I have somebody I could complain to that might actually listen to me, because my elders or whoever really didn't believe that I was hurting
Mhm.
until one Sunday I forgot to say the words of institution, and we could discuss the theological part,
Right.
implications at some other time. But for me, it was like I exposed myself as a flawed human being in front of the whole congregation,
Wow.
and so I went back to my office, and I was just an emotional wreck. And it wasn't like that caused my burnout. It was just sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And two of the elders came back and to kind of remind me to do the words of institution at the next service. And when they saw my eyes welling up with tears, I think they knew that was when they finally realized, oh, I think Kevin does need some help. What's going on here? This is not something that you just go back to your office and get all emotional about. So it was just a really, yeah, it was a tough time. It's a tough
Yeah.
time.
Well, thank the Lord that He led you to Shepherd's Canyon, and you're
Yeah,
smiling
yeah,
today and excited about what you
right.
get to do. So tell me a little bit now. That kind of gives us a good segue into the work at Shepherd's Canyon. I was telling you when I saw you a couple weeks ago or whatever it was, in
Yeah,
again
yeah.
February in Phoenix. How wonderful is that?
Oh, no,
Because I'm in Southeast Idaho. We've got like 11 inches of snow Friday and Saturday, and it's been snowing today, and it's going to get to 28 degrees, and well, I'm not a fan anyway. And then again, you threw in COVID in our parts of the country, Montana
yeah,
and like Idaho, and it was extremely divisive. And so that's just I don't know if you felt this. There were sometimes I'm like, we can't win. There's just
right.
nothing
Oh,
we
yeah,
can do to win, but yet people are expecting us to lead them in the way that fits their agenda and their personal choices. And they're all diverse within the church, but that's a whole different conversation. So anyway, but again, what COVID did on a side note was expose, I think, that the mental health need of pastors that was already there, and all
right.
it did was heighten it and make it more of an awareness and kind of add some fuel to the underlying issues that were already there. And so now that really brings into the ministries like you do, the ministries that I do, to how can we now help the
Right.
church work together, build one another up in love, and flourish,
Yeah,
because that's really what we want. We want healthy pastors, we want healthy churches,
right.
and we want healthy DCEs too. So for those
Oh, yeah,
who, I mean,
yeah,
I've interviewed a couple DCEs, but directors of Christian education, for those who are
right.
watching that are outside the LCMS, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod context, just to let you know, they're professional church workers, usually family youth ministries and things like that, and music ministry and whatnot. So Clears that up. So you go to Shepherd's Canyon, and then a year and a half later, or whatever it is now, you find yourself there as the director of it.
Right.
So tell me, I would like to hear a couple things. What made you think, yeah, I would like to come work at this place?
Sure.
And then tell me about what you guys do, because really, I want you to be able to highlight the ministry that you have there.
Oh, sure. And there's a little part that I skipped in between all of this here because I'd actually left my church at the end of February because after well, my elders had given me some time off, and for whatever reason during that time off, and it really wasn't enough, but even though it was like a whole month, but during that time off is when uh, well, previous to this, as part of my healing, I was also part of a ministry called Delight Your Marriage. And so I'd gone through that. It's a wonderful program, podcast, but also there's 12-week programs for men separately and wives separately. And my wife encouraged me to try this out, and I was just blown away at how good it was. And so when I anyway in December during that time off, they Delight Your Marriage had offered me a position. They said, "Hey, we want you to work for us. We you can't work evenings and you can't work weekends because we want our workers to be healthy." And I'm like, pinch me. Am I dreaming or what? What church ministry has ever offered me a position and said I couldn't work evenings or weekends? And so I was just like, this is a great ministry. I'm going to work for them. And so yeah, so I left the church and started working for them in February of that year, which would have been 2022 maybe or whatever it was. And but anyway, and then I was there for about 6 months later. See, I actually did early retirement because I had no intention of getting back into El Simis ministry or anything like that here. So I was collecting my pension because the rule of 85, if you know what that is.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so anyway, 6 months later, I realized, you know what? Um, I love working for them, but I can't like go visit my coworkers for supper at or go to their kids' ball games because everybody worked online and we're in different states, and so it was just a different kind of ministry that I'm more of a people person, and so when when Shepherd's Canyon said, "Hey, come join us," I thought, you know what, this is a good leaping point. I had just finished doing some training with intentional interim ministry, and so I thought, well, if nothing else, I can at least kind of help in this way or whatever. So just seeing what God has in store. But your second question was more about what the ministry does.
yeah.
And so, yeah, so people come, and whether it's because they're stressed out or burned out, or they have conflict with someone or people in the church, or whether it's or they just have a life change. Maybe they're retiring or they're going on a sabbatical. They just want some perspective, and so they come. And we come they come from a Monday to a Monday, so it's a full week, and they get 20 hours of counseling. Most of that is in group time. We only have 8 people at a time, so those 8 people with 2 therapists, one male, one female, and then a chaplain. And so they get 20 hours of counseling. In the mornings, it's group sessions where they kind of tell their story and people are kind of empathizing with each other, and there's lessons taught, things like that here. But it's all customized. Okay, it's not just like, okay, A, B, C, D, and you're healed.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
very customized, and then but then in the afternoons is individual and couples counseling and stuff. They have sessions with the therapists, and then the evenings is just kind of like a game time and stuff like that, or relaxing or movie time. And then Friday's a day off, so they can kind of go into town, kind of walk around, just kind of decompress from those 3 intense days. But it is a relaxing time, but it's intentional. And so I compare it to like we all at some point or other and end up in a doctor's office, and perhaps some of us end up needing surgery, whether it's knee surgery or heart surgery or brain surgery or whatever here. And you don't go to and you don't just say, well, I'll have knee surgery, I'll schedule it for 1 week or for 1 hour a week for the next 12 weeks. You get it all done in one time. And so that's kind of what we do. Is we don't handle the physical part, but we handle the emotional part, and we don't do that in 1 hour a week sessions like you would do in therapy, which we encourage afterwards. But this is sort of like urgent care or an operation where it's like, okay, let's deal with this in a short amount of time, so you can go back and continue your healing after you come here. So
Yeah, so you would kind of characterize your ministry as trauma crisis type oriented. Most of the people
pretty
you get
much,
there are you're triaging them, right?
yeah, yep, yep.
Trying to
But
get
and not everyone has to be to the edge of their last rope to come. So, but it's both. It's all the above. Yeah,
right, but typically for someone to take a week and go to a retreat like that, they probably are they're grasping for something to
absolutely,
uh,
absolutely. Yeah,
and it's interesting because I did a conference in October
yeah,
in Louisiana, and there was a guy there who was just, kind of like you explained yourself in Montana,
yeah,
and I was encouraging him to take some time off and get some more directed counseling and whatnot, and I saw him in February, and he had he'd just gone to Shepherd's Canyon a few weeks before or whatever, and radically different countenance. And so
good.
I know that it works. Because how long has Shepherd's Canyon been around?
Yeah. Well, Barb and Dave Anderson uh, founded it 15 years ago. So it's been around for, that long. And yeah. And I'm glad you made that distinction because like there's a lot of ministries that have either respite ministries or preventative ministries, and ours is therapeutic.
Right.
Um, you know, just going back to the broke, like if you have a broken leg, you don't just rest for a couple months and it's all better. You kind of have to have it set. And this is kind of like the setting of that broken bone so you can heal properly and stuff. So,
Yeah, and I really appreciate that because my ministry is very preventative oriented, and
yes.
so when I have people who say I'm burnt out, I'm like, yeah, everything that I offer to kind of what you had mentioned before, I can't even see that. I can't even see that right now. I don't even see myself as who I used to be. I feel like everything I do is a failure,
Yeah.
and they need that time to have that corrective surgery, if you will, or that resetting of the leg, to use that analogy. And then now we can move on to where, okay, now that I'm in a place of a little more health, now I can start looking at how people are actually encouraging me, how I am feeling affirmed, how they are showing genuine and sincere gratitude. And so I have that personal satisfaction once again that I just found elusive because I was at such a place where, again, you've been there as pastors. It's not a normal job. And so we lead with our heart, and we're here to make a difference for the kingdom of God and eternal ramifications in people's lives. And that can be such a weight that we were never intended to carry, but yet we find ourselves carrying. And so I'm hoping that as time progresses, that we can institute some more healthy practices
Yeah.
for pastors, that they would go, you know what, I need to take the time to pause. I need
Yeah.
to reflect a little bit more, and I need to not try to carry it all. I was
Yeah.
never, and this in a world that has every access to everything 24/7. We're given the burdens of the world, and we were
Yeah.
never meant to carry those. Only Christ was meant to carry those. And so, I
Amen.
have a friend who said that, and I'm like, yeah, that's brilliant because that's
Yeah.
some of the problem that we have with our depression and anxiety and
Yeah.
stress in our culture right now is that we just have too much access to everything. And so,
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead. You're gonna say something.
I was just gonna say that whole thing is kind of where I was at is, and I know other people like this too, where it's like you kind of get this mindset that God needs you more than you need God.
Yeah,
It's like this arrogance, pride, whatever you want to call it here, but it's just amazing how because so many people come to you and say, "Hey, I need you, I need you, I need you." It's like, you almost get this impression that, well, I can't take a day off because God can't handle the world without me. And
okay.
so it's just a real dangerous place to be in because that causes not only does it cause burnout, but really, I mean, because a lot of people can get burned out and you just cease the activity or change jobs or do whatever here. But sometimes us as caregivers, we're in what's called compassion fatigue.
Right.
And that's and I mean, caregivers, medical people get this. And it's not because it's not like you're the one on the operating table, but when you're caring for that person, you empathize with them so much that you carry that burden, like what you were just talking about here and you have so many of these traumatic experiences, and it's not really primary traumatic; it's secondary. And so that secondary, it's just like with smoking and secondary smoke. It's like, you're still getting the effects of that smoke or of that trauma. And so it becomes compassion fatigue, and it's a whole different ballgame there.
Yeah, you kind of have a twofold thing. God's depending upon me, and now everyone else is depending upon me. And so you kind of get to where Moses was before Jethro corrected him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's what you're doing is not good, right? And it's hard. It's hard because you don't want to let God down. You don't want to let people down.
Right.
And then you sit there. I don't know how you were, but many of us struggle with imposter syndrome. It's like if people really knew who I was, because I mean, your thing was, hey, I forgot the words of institution, and I went and sat in my office, and I was just, who am I anymore? This is horrible. And if people knew what, years ago, this is a side note, my wife and I were struggling a little bit, and I was a music minister when I was at Calvary Chapel,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and and so I said to my wife, let's go talk to the pastor. And so we sat down with him, and she says, she says to him, she goes, I just want to know what he's thinking. And he goes, oh no, honey, you couldn't handle what goes on in his mind. And so,
Can't handle the truth.
and I'm like, yeah, if you knew where did that thought come from? He looked at me one time and he goes, it's a good thing that mind's redeemed. And I said, I wonder sometimes. Anyway, anyway, we could talk about stories, but we won't. Let's move on to a little bit of. So you're in this ministry, you've been there, you said, a year and a half now. Is that right? And so what have you seen as is there any common challenges that you find pastors facing?
I mean, I asked our therapist this, and I've compiled a list of like 20 different things that people have come for. But probably at the top of the list is really burnout is probably the most popular thing here. We had this one guy, he wrote to me several months ago, and he said, hey, I just I need help. I feel like I'm just a zombie. I'm alive, I'm just barely walking around here. I'm not even sure if I believe in God anymore. And I was pretty new at the time. And I'm like, I don't know if I can help. If our ministry can really help this, extensive thing here. And so I turned it over to our counseling care director. He's been doing this for 15 years, and he kind of talks with the people before they come, just to make sure it's going to be a good fit. And so I didn't even know it until after he was here that this was the guy that wrote to me. And then at the end of the week, he came into our staff and volunteer devotion time, and he just thanked us profusely and said, this is the best week of my life.
Hmm.
And then a friend of his who was also here that week, he happened to be out from a different country, because we get people from all over. And he said, you know what, you guys, you guys are like the tow trucks that tow the tow trucks.
Hmm.
Pastors, we're helping people all the time, but who helps the people that are helping the others and stuff? And so that was just a real affirmation of what we do and all that. So it was really great. So
Yeah. So, do you find any, and again, I know you're on a different side of it than the counseling side, but
right,
you're
right.
still present, and you still interact with a lot of the guests that come there. But is there anything that you're seeing that church members could do that maybe could help these pastors?
Sure, sure. Well, when you're rock climbing, let's say, even if it's the indoor kind with the little rocks that you grab every so often here, you're always supposed to have. You always have to have at least 2 points of contact, maybe three, preferably. When you move one hand and you move one hand and you move one foot and then another foot, you don't want to you can't just some people can, I suppose, just jump from one thing to the next here with all four people. Something has to be contacted. And so those are like different places to support. And so like with pastors and DCEs and teachers, whatever here, they need at least certain areas they can go to. Well, maybe I've got a lot of work to do, but at least I have a good salary. Oh, wait a minute. No, I don't. Or at least I have a good health plan. Oh, wait, no, I've got like the worst one that they offer. Or at least I've got lots of vacation time so I can recover. Oh, nope. So it's just like, it just seems like congregations are trying to whittle down every single kind of support that they can give church workers, whether it's financial or physical. Churches should be like, I was listening to the Grace Place podcast the other day, and I know he's going to be a guest on yours here sometime around this time.
Well, he
You know,
was about a month and a half ago.
oh, a month and a half ago. Okay. So, but I listened to that podcast and he mentioned how, with LCMS pastors, I mean, with the health of pastors, the obesity level of the country is 40%. And for pastors, it's LCMS pastors is 71%. So, maybe churches could be doing things to support their physical health, their emotional health, just all these different things. And there's a lot of programs out there and things, but so yeah, so I think too, and I think too that churches need to have maybe like a committee of people that are caring for that pastor in a very personal and intimate way, so that if that pastor does have some struggles, like let's just say that there's a salary issue or there's a time off issue, that these people can be advocates for him, because otherwise it sounds very self-serving, like, hey, I need more money, I need more time off. The congregation looks at that and goes, you took a vow of poverty when you took this job here. So I'm sorry. If you don't like it, you can go somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really interesting because, speaking from, I guess, a little bit of experience, we'll call it a lot of experience, but I think the challenge that I wrestle with, and I can't say this is the same for every pastor, but when salary is an issue or healthcare is an issue,
Yeah.
it really gives an indication of how much they value their
Yeah.
spiritual life and the pastor's role in their life.
Yeah.
And so that's frustrating too at times, because you're like, wait, this should be the most important thing, not the pastor, but your spiritual life should be the most
Right.
important thing in your life. And by your actions, you're showing that it's actually not the priority in your life. And so again, and we've seen that with declining churches, and they just can't afford pastors and
Yeah.
whatnot. And so it's just an interesting thing that, again, that the psychological toll and emotional toll it plays on a pastor is you want a pastor, but yet your actions show you really don't want a pastor that's healthy. You don't, you just want someone. And I find too that some of the challenges is that people just say, well, we just want to have somebody there on Sunday. We're happy to have them on Sunday. And it's like, well, but that's, to me, that's the small part of the ministry. Right.
Right.
It's all the other things that you do when you're meeting with people and they're spiritually vomiting on you and all these things that you get to do. And we as pastors have the worst mental health in the caregiving, second only to counselors in the caregiving. So like first responders and nurses have better mental health than we do. And so that's just an interesting note. Do with it what you want, but that's what it is. So church members I like that. Church members can, really say, how do we support the pastor in a broader way? And I know that Grace Place Wellness is working on a care worker like committee or whatever.
Yeah.
I went to a seminar, I can't remember what he called it, but it's really there's people that are intentional and about the pastoral care. And what I liked about it too is it wasn't like, let's have an election for these people. Let's pick the people who actually want to care for the pastor and can be
Right.
a good advocate for the pastor. Because you're right. I mean, I don't know how you were when you were in the pastor role, but I never, like, every time I've gotten a raise since I've been in this position, I always go, oh well, that's very kind of you, thank you, and I'm like, it is very kind and it's
Yeah.
great. But I never want to be the one that say, hey, I really like to be able to make this salary, or it'd be really helpful if I could do this.
Yeah.
And again, because not only did we take a vow of poverty, but we said, our life is yours, Lord. And so we trust the Lord for those things. And sometimes maybe we're too selfish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
that's a form of pride too. I'm going to
Yeah.
be a martyr for the kingdom. So
Right. Right.
yeah, your ministry, you mentioned teachers and DCEs. So do you serve other professional church workers, or is it only pastors?
So yeah, no, we serve everyone in full-time Christian ministry, whether it's teacher, DCE. We also serve people outside of the LCMS that are in Christian ministry. So and part of the reason, I mean, most people we serve are in the LCMS, at least half, and then there's a percentage that are Lutheran but not LCMS, and then percentage that is outside of that. But it's because we're one of the very few places in the whole country, maybe the whole world, that do this type of uh, triage or whatever you call it here for church workers. And There's we're modeled after a ministry in Colorado, and besides them, there's just a couple of others that do this for all denominations, and so we're happy to be able to bring in and help others. So it's great.
No, I appreciate that. You answered one of my next questions was,
Oh,
if
yeah.
you're not LCMS, can you go? And I know that again, it's Genesis, I believe, is from LCMS guys and gals, and so maybe that's why
Yeah.
it is. You know,
Yeah, and we are an LCMS RSO, recognized service organization, and so we have that stamp of approval, and we get lots of support and lots of connections with Missouri Synod. We are independent from the LCMS, but we're connected. So
yeah,
if that makes
yeah.
sense.
Well, one thing that I appreciate about organizations like you is that you see it the kingdom of God as a whole and not just denomination driven.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's really, I mean, one thing because if everyone looks at this podcast or this the YouTube channel, they'll see I interview a lot of different people and different
Oh,
denominations. In fact, March 4th, which this will air in April, like I said, but March 4th, what launched Dr. Regine Preschel-Bell from Duke Clergy Health Initiative,
sure,
probably the
sure.
leading, in my opinion, the one of the leading researchers in
Oh, yeah.
pastoral and clergy mental health.
Oh, yeah.
And her whole thing is United Methodist,
Oh,
1800
right.
United
Yeah.
Methodist pastors, which brings a different dynamic. Actually, it spurred some ideas for further research for me, but she and I were
Ah,
talking. But again, what we're finding, and I think what you've mentioned, and what we're finding is whether it doesn't matter what denomination you're in, the
right.
pressures of being a church worker are very common across all denominations and across every level of church work. I would even say that there's a level of lay leaders who lead ministries that experience some of the same things that pastors do,
Yeah.
at a different level, of course, but they do experience it. And another few questions about Shepherd's Canyon. So, what do people have to pay if they need to go to you?
Yeah. Well, we work it out with them so that no one has to pay anything more than what they can afford. I mean, if we looked at the actual cost, if you divide our budget by the number of people that we serve, I would have to say that it costs altogether, it costs about $7,000 per person, 14 per couple. But now we don't charge that because people would just go, I guess I'll just go be a Walmart greeter because at least I know how to greet people at the door, which is kind of where I was years ago.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, so our costs are probably closer to what probably I would say what we quote, and I have a board meeting next week, and I'm proposing this rate. So I'll give you the new rate since this is coming out in April. But the rate would be 4,000 per person and 5,000 per couple. So we just raise a little bit for the spouse because they share rooms, they share,
Sure.
things like that. And so plus we really encourage spouses to come with because a lot of times they're hurting too. Because when a pastor or whoever can't go and be honest with, or transparent, I should say, with everyone that in their congregation or even other pastors, because they have this, mask you have to wear apparently. So you dump it all on your spouse, and then she has issues, and so it's good for husbands and wives to come together, and because the wife is the support, or husband, depending on which, because sometimes we have male and female DCEs or teachers or whoever and stuff to come in. But yeah, but for those that are in the LCMS, and many denominations will do this, they will support their church workers.
Yeah.
So you can get money from your church, from your district or region, or your denomination or network or whatever part of your church is involved with. So there's usually lots of support. So I don't like quoting prices, but you asked, no, that's the
No,
question.
no, and I think what you're saying is, yeah, it costs money, but again, the product that you're getting, for lack of a better term, the service you're getting is top notch, and has worked over the years to become very valuable to the church at large. But cost should never be a prohibitive means or a measure to not go. And so, really, the what I want to encourage anyone who's considering this is to at least reach out to you
Yeah,
and at least have that conversation. And then
absolutely.
because there's probably creative ways. I mean, you know
Yeah,
what church I could say what church would say their pastor, is like, hey, if I don't get some help, I'm gonna burn out and leave the ministry, and you won't have a pastor, and the church has lost, somebody. What church wouldn't go, hey, to the congregation? Can
Yeah.
we send the pastor to this, right? Type thing. And again, pastor has to get to the place where he's willing to admit that. In my experience, we have a real enemy who is trying to stop our ministries, and
Yep.
my
Yep.
spouse gets more more attacked by the enemy, because that gets to me more than I can deal with it. I'm just like, oh yeah, yeah, brush it off. But when it's someone I love so dearly, and so that's some of the challenge too, is you just see the hit that your spouses take, because you're in the ministry, and the sacrifice that they make for you to be in the ministry, because often you have to have your spouse work, because the church can't pay enough, and the spouse and your family gets affected by, I'll say this kindly, but often subpar insurance and whatnot. And so our churches that can't even afford insurance, and so pastors, have to purchase it in different ways, and so it's just a lot of factors that go in there. And so I like what Grace Place Wellness is doing, and your support for that, for Dr.
Yep.
Walton, and what they're doing there is to really help the churches care for their pastors better.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. I guess the kind of just in conclusion, your experience, and it could be your experience as a pastor, it could be experience at Shepherd's Canyon there. But what's something maybe you could share with pastors or church workers that might help with their positive mental health?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is that I think a lot of times people, some pastors, or there's this perception out there that, well, you just have to pray more and read the Bible more, and that's always a good thing.
Mhm.
But it's just like, I mean, there are church religions that say, hey, you don't need to get a blood transfusion or get this medical physical thing taken care of, because you got to have enough faith and that'll solve itself. And when we're talking about mental health, besides physical health, with mental health, it just seems like some people sort of treat that like the Christian scientists treat physical health. It's like, well, you just pray more and read the Bible more, and all your mental health issues will be solved. And because there's always been this stigma against mental health, because it's not something you can see. You only see the results, you don't see the cause, and so it's just this mysterious thing that people tend to kind of shy away from. So, but yep, it's a good thing.
Yeah, so it's interesting. One of the other interviews that people can look up is Dr. Chris Adams from Biola University, and he's
Yeah.
also the director of Flourishing in Ministry.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things that he talks about, because I mentioned that a lot of denominations, and one that I served in for years, was like anti-psychology completely, right?
Oh,
And some of the challenge that when I present to pastors and whatnot, some of the challenges, some of my research is very clinical and uses some terms that in the past have made people get defensive about. And I really appreciate him. Here he is, a psychologist, but he's a Christian and he's been a
yeah.
pastor. And he goes, yeah, not all psychology is great. And he goes, and you should have some reserve. You should
Right.
be, because, but to your point, we go to a doctor for a broken leg, or if we think we have, the COVID, we go get tested or whatnot. And there are great strides not just psychology, but that sciences have made to understand, because you mentioned causes. Well, we
Yeah.
can we know what causes it, especially for pastors.
Right.
There's several factors that cause burnout with pastors: ambiguous job expectations, undefined job roles, and I didn't know I was supposed to know how to be a plumber right before I became or a landscaper or whatnot. And so it's a lot of these things that you just don't know. And so we can look at work-life balance, we can look at health. I think it would be great. So I've shared this with people before. I'm one of those who I love to golf. And so right now you can't golf because of the season, but I get out there early, and I love to get out there at like 6 o'clock in the morning. I can do 9 holes, and I can be at the office by 8:30, 9 o'clock. But
Yeah.
when the weather starts changing and light gets worse, sometimes I can't get to the office till 10, and I guarantee I struggle for that like hour that I normally was at the office, feeling guilty for not being there, even though I didn't have somebody, I'm not having a meeting or anything like that. And so if you had a care team, kind of like what you're suggesting, that had people surround him and say, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay for you to do this. Because we have weeks, as you know, that are not 80, 90-hour weeks, and you have weeks that are only 50. And I say that because, and we don't turn it off. That's the other thing too. It's really hard, even though we try to take a day off. I went to Hawaii in January and with another pastor, and yeah, it was time off, but we talked about ministry the whole time, and we were available by phone and by email, so we still were fielding stuff, and that's probably our bad on that, but that's what we do, and so again, Shepherd's Canyon, I'll put the link in the comment section for people to
Yeah.
be able to check it out. I love what you do. Is there any final thing that you would say to a pastor or church worker who maybe is vacillating of maybe they should go there, maybe they shouldn't? What would you encourage them?
Well, I would just ask them, would you ever leave your house without looking at the mirror first, or leave your where you're robing to go into the sanctuary without checking, making sure everything is okay? So that's kind of what this ministry does, is, or at least with the counseling in general here, is it kind of helps you reflect back on yourself, how you look at yourself through the eyes of someone else, and it gives you a different perspective. And so that's kind of what a mirror does, and we all use mirrors. So
Mhm.
it's a good way to kind of reflect on your own life and see where you can make some changes and challenges. So
Yeah, and I would say as you're looking in the mirror, if you can't see, if everything you see is negative, you might need to get some help.
there you go. There you go.
So anyway, well, Kevin, thanks so much. I appreciate the work that you do there. I appreciate you being just so genuine and offering your story.
Yep.
I find that we learn a lot more when people are willing to share
Sure.
their
Sure.
weaknesses and go, hey, this was a time. But also share what God brought to you to help you get to the place where you are now. And so I'm just so thankful for what you all do. And so again, I'll have the information for him in the comments. If you guys want to reach out and check it out, I encourage you to do that. And together we can grow and build one another up in love and help the church flourish. Thank you, Kevin.
You bet. Have a great day with you.